It is my pleasure now to introduce Frank of Nova Frank, since his days in Troppo, quite a few years ago now.
Yeah.
In fact, I think the first time we ever met was here in Chicago at this event.
I believe so.
So that's nice to meet you again, and it's great that you're presenting here, or I think is a really interesting company solving a very specific problem. So with that, over to you, Frank.
Super. Thank you very much, Alan. Thanks for coming to my presentation. So today I'm going to be talking about Mio as a use case for using communication and collaboration APIs. A lot of you guys are younger, so you might not remember in the 1990s, but in the 1990s, everyone decided that communication was getting too complicated with just voicemail and email. So a whole class and category of communication platforms came out under the category of unified communications. It was going to simplify all your communication. It was going to come into one user interface. You'd be able to grab your voicemail and email from one simple spot. And since then, there's been just a mass proliferation of channels and how you communicate in a company. In the early 2000s, we started getting the instant messaging with AIM and Yahoo. Then we got bring your own device with SMS being brought into the businesses. And in the last few years, we've come to the spot where we have unified communications platforms that have expanded to include business messaging, bring your own device, multiple phone numbers because of that. And then you have business messaging, which is often tied to either a specific messaging app or to some other business services like Chatter with Salesforce. So the important thing to keep in mind is that messaging is the most important way that your employees and your company communicates nowadays. It's been the fastest growing. There's a lot of studies that show about how it breaks down hierarchies and makes it easy for information to get shared across different people in the company, keep people in the know and keep them engaged. It's the highest volume. All these different ways of communicating, and business messaging is the most important way that your employees communicate. And just to give an idea of how it changed, when I started dating my wife in 2004, the joke was, if you're over 30, you don't understand text messaging, and if you're under 30, you do. I was over 30, and my wife was under 30. Luckily, I figured out how to do text messaging, and we've had a successful relationship since then. So not only is it the most important way people communicate, and has been growing over the last 10, 15, 20 years, you can look at the total volume of people. Just for these 5 platforms, there's over 500 million daily active users or monthly active users, right? So that's a huge volume on the top 5 players in the business messaging category. What's also interesting about this is that of these 500 million, 350 million of them are going to be changing to different platforms in the next 12 to 18 months. Skype is being end-of-lifed. Cisco Jabber, although it's still growing and seems to be merging with WebEx Teams, is also, in a sense, superseded by the WebEx Teams platform. So there's going to be a huge amount of churn in how businesses use, what platforms they're using with business messaging. And so that's about 70% of the existing user base is going to be changing business messaging platforms in the next 12 to 24 months. And there's a ton of platforms to go to, not just Slack as being the hot one for Silicon Valley and the one people like the most in that area. G2 Grid online, you can go check it out. It has a website of over 100 different applications and solutions that include business messaging. A lot of them are pure unified communication platforms like WebEx and WebEx Teams. Other ones are just simply chat like Slack. And then there's a lot of chat business messaging functions tied into other services that have some sort of niche value in the company. What this means is that there's going to be more and more fragmentation and splitting of how people use messaging in an environment. And the important thing to note is that these messaging systems don't work together. It's not like a phone. You can call anybody on a phone and you know that they're going to pick up. You can call from an Android phone to an iOS phone. You can call from AT&T to Verizon. There's a common backbone. Anybody can communicate over the phone. But the simplification of how people communicate and making it easy, all come into one spot, was the promise of unified communication. But the reality is the most important way people communicate, business messaging, is a completely fragmented mess. They don't interoperate, they don't communicate, they don't interact, they don't connect. What's important about that also is when you take a look at how businesses have deployed business messaging, 91% of companies out there have more than have two or more business messaging apps, right? 60%, 70% have three or more. I talked to one major retailer up in the Minneapolis area. They said that they have 14 different business apps that include business messaging. And I thought that was crazy until you go back and take a look at the G2 Grid slide again with about 100, 125 different business messaging apps. Recently I talked to a 400-person company with 5 different collaboration messaging apps. In their case, it was due to acquisitions. It was 4 or 5, 80-person companies coming together to join, and they all were on a different business messaging platform. Half of our inbound leads are 400-person companies or less, which is important to note. If 400-person companies can't get everyone onto a single platform, what does that mean for a 1,000 or a 10,000-person company? And the thing about this problem is that this has now been going on for a long time, and CIOs have, in large part, not had to worry about this or were able to ignore this problem simply because of the fact that there wasn't a solution. There was nothing they could do about it. There was no product out there. There was no service until Mio. But it's been going on for a long, long time. We commonly walk into large companies with 10,000 people where they'll be end-of-lifing Skype. They have Jabber out there people message on. There's the engineers on Slack, and Microsoft Teams is coming in there as well. So there's just a mix of 4 or 5 platforms. This has been going on for a long time. And it costs your company money, right? There's some great studies. If you go look at Harvard Business Review on collaboration and collaboration messaging, the one I like in particular is called Better People Analytics. It takes a look how you can look at the communication network for an individual and tie that into the company and see if that individual is an innovator, an ideator, operational, what type of person that is, if they're a leader. That's also how an executive likes to think about their company. Are they trying to drive a company to be an efficient company, an operational company? Like when I was at Cisco, after Cisco acquired Tropo, large parts of Cisco are meant to be operational, efficient companies. Other parts of Cisco are trying to be innovative components of the company. But the reality is, as soon as you come in and start cutting communication nodes, because your most important way your employees communicate, if you start cutting those nodes because they're not on the same platform, it's hard to design any type of company, right? It's hard to drive your company to be an innovative or operational because people aren't communicating. Oh, wrong way. And you can drive cost models from that. So just on taking a look at a context switching model, because we bump into a lot of customers who actually license 2 platforms, usually Microsoft Teams and WebEx Teams. If you take a look at that, we see anywhere from 20 to 300 or 400, 500 cross-platform messages a day for the companies who are using our service. We think that fairly equates to at least 5 context switches a day at 1 minute per context switch. That's almost 1.7 hours a month. If your fully loaded cost for your employees is $50 an hour, that's $83 a month that you're spending on people just doing context switching because they have one part of the company on Microsoft Teams and another part on Slack and another part on WebEx, right? They're just context switching to manage those conversations. I think that number's low because it's looking at a cost model. I think it should really be looking at a revenue model. If someone costs $50 an hour, you expect to be making $150 to $200 an hour off them. That's what it's really affecting you. But of course, not everybody opens up both applications. I frequently talk to directors of IT who say, I don't have an interop problem because I only open up one of the platforms. So what is the cost for someone who spends 10, 15 minutes crafting a message they send to that person and that person never even sees it? You have employees wasting time creating communication, being thoughtful about communication, trying to affect the business, and it's simply worse than being ignored. It's not even being picked up. And the worst part about this is that I hear the story not too infrequently, is that it creates interpersonal conflict in a company. One of the IT guys I was talking to specifically, he's walking down a hallway. He has a friend of his he hasn't seen in a month or two, and they get into a heated argument before he realizes they're arguing about, why haven't you responded to my messages? I'm trying to get my project done. I need approval on these 4 or 5 things. And they go back, I haven't seen your messages. They have this heated argument. It takes them 15 minutes to realize, even though they both are licensed on Microsoft Teams and WebEx Teams, one only opens up Microsoft, one only opens up WebEx. How do you put a cost in your company on a system that is causing interpersonal conflict and friction at an unseen layer? It's extremely hard. It's a major point of friction for your company. Combined with this employees want choice, we've seen this play out before. Bring your own device, Mac versus PC. Employees want choice. So you want to have the tools to provide your employees some choice so they can make the work as efficiently as they want, get the value of different tools. More and more, we're expecting to have choice, Mac versus PC, bring your own device. This battle has been done before. Another thing driving multiple platforms at a company comes down to the fact that all these different platforms have different integrations that provide different value to different groups, right? I constantly get asked, like, which platform is better? And it's not which platform is better, but it's which platform works better for different people in your company. I used to be a developer. I totally understand why developers love Slack. It's tied into all the Jira and open source software toolkits that you're going to use. You've been building bots for a while to manage your workflow. Slack is awesome. I'm on business calls 6 to 8 hours a day, and I was at Cisco. I love the room kits. I love the DX80s. I love the high definition video when I'm doing presentations to customers. I love WebEx Teams. And I understand if you're in the back office in accounting or something where you have to use spreadsheets and you're doing Word documents and doing that type of production where you need to be tied into the O365 tools, you're going to want to use Microsoft Teams. It has the best integrations. But companies aren't just organizationally based, they're teams based, right? Which Microsoft and Cisco do a good job acknowledging in how they created their collaboration messaging tools. There's hundreds of different types of teams, but if I just took a software development team and overlaid that on top of that organization, very quickly you can see that this team isn't connected on the same platform. So it's hard to build teams out that are all communicating with the most important way you communicate. And then we look at change management. It's taking large companies 6 to 24 months to roll out a new collaboration platform. And this is because when you deploy, in this case, if you deploy WebEx Teams to take over Slack for the CIO's organization, you completely cut all the communication networks for that everybody under the CIO. They have to run 2 platforms during that period of time during the transition. So the common complaint by IT is, well, I deploy a platform and the adoption is very low. Nobody understands the value it provides. It's because they still have to be running the old platform and they're just not going to start using it because there's not enough of a network effect for them to get an advantage. This goes on for a long time as they deploy it from platform to group to group to group. But imagine from day one with Mio, you could deploy a new platform for a group, and if there was some data migration, immediately they'd be communicating with everybody. Your adoption would be there right away, and you wouldn't have to string out a deployment over 18 or 24 months. And then there's acquisitions. Even if you got everybody in the company on one platform, it doesn't matter who you may acquire companies. Cisco acquired Tropo. At the time at Tropo, we were using Slack. So could you imagine spending $70 million on a company and the most important way you need to communicate with them, you just can't communicate? Cisco's using at the time Spark, WebEx Teams. We were using Slack. And even if you standardize on one platform in your company, you can't control what your vendors, your partners, your suppliers, your PR firm, your distributors, you can't control what platform they're using. And so we constantly run into companies where people are running multiple platforms because they have to talk to a partner. So this switching of the platforms, they're running into this context switching is in their daily basis. This is a huge problem. Workers spend on average 11.5 hours a week working with outsiders. So you have 3 choices as a business. You can migrate everybody to one platform, which something like 60% of the people who are in proof of concept with us now told us that 12 to 18 months ago. They said, well, we're just going to get everybody on Slack, or we're just going to get everybody on WebEx Teams. But even if you get everybody, you think you get everybody to one platform, again, people demand choice. There's still shadow IT going on, which is a big problem with people wanting to use tools that work for them. And there's still groups within your company who are getting significant advantages from using these different tools because of their integrations. So you're losing that value. If you get everybody on one platform, you're losing the value of your developers being tied into all the development tools, for example. Or you can run multiple platforms and run them as an island. This is what's been happening for the last 10 or 15 years or 20 years. But you have costs on context switching, you have the costs with missed messages, and you have the costs with interpersonal friction. Or you could decide to build bridges, and I'm stealing a little bit from Cisco's tagline recently, which is build bridges. And Mio is, in this case, is the bridge. No one would ever buy a phone system where they couldn't call everyone. Why would you put in place business messaging where not everybody in your company can talk to each other. So that's the problem we solve. Mio solves the problem of business messaging interoperability. Today we do it with WebEx Teams, Microsoft Teams, and Slack. We do 2 platforms at a time. We also support Cisco Jabber and WebEx Teams mode. We're adding Skype for Business on-prem in Q4, and we'll be adding different platforms as we go. Our goal is to add more and more platforms into the mix through whether we do the implementation or we do it through an API program. But we want to support as many platforms as possible as we go. We're also, right now we support 2 platforms at a time. Next year we're going to be supporting 3 or more platforms. Right now we do the in-company problem. Next year we're going to be coming out with federated, and we've invested a lot in security. Who we are as a company, we're out of Austin, Texas. My favorite part of the company is that the team is extremely experienced in taking startups and either going to IPO or acquisition, which means that they're very good at being responsive to market and customer demands. I've been at a lot of startups where they aren't responsive to the market. Mio is by far the most responsive to the market demands of any company I've been at. We've won earlier this year. We won at Enterprise Connect. We won the best collaboration innovation. We just got an award from CIO Enterprise. The magazine is one of the top innovators. We're on the Cisco GPL. And fundamentally, what we are is the reason why we're a use case here is we're simply using the API programs provided by these communication platforms, by Slack, Microsoft, and WebEx Teams, to connect the platforms. So we're a software as a service sitting between softwares as a service. We simply receive, to put it simply, we receive messages, we transform the messages, and we shoot them out the other side. So we're effectively a bridge. We don't store any message content. We don't store any message data. We're simply effectively a collaboration messaging router, basically the backbone of collaboration messaging. I do want to get a special shout out to Cisco. Of all the partners, Cisco has been the most supportive of interoperability. We can go back to them and ask them for APIs. They deliver the APIs. It's been a great group of people to work with. Certainly I came from Cisco, so I got along well with them before. But Cisco is making a very concerted effort towards making systems work together. And just to wrap up, our goal for our service is that it's invisible, simple to set up, and seamless. So if you look back to the AIM Yahoo days, there were a lot of interoperability solutions, but they required a new client. So we don't want to create a new client. We don't want your experience to be different, right? We want you to use Slack. We want you to use WebEx Teams. We want you to use Microsoft Teams exactly as you use it. And so it's completely invisible it's completely invisible to you that Mio's there. Mio works best when you don't even know about it. If you want a demo of this, you can come check out m.io. We have some videos online. We have some contact forms you can fill out, and also we have, you can certainly reach out to me directly at frank@m.io. So thank you very much.
Excellent. That was great, Frank. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions for Frank?
And looks like you can do a video call across the 3 platforms?
Actually, we don't support video yet. I got to get that off the marketing page.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, our plan is we'd like to do video and voice in the long run, but right now we're focused on the business message.
So how does Slack see a Teams user if in this model? Do they see it as a Slack user itself?
Yeah, exactly. So right now you have to be provisioned on all the platforms.
Oh, okay.
That's what gives. Right now you have to be provisioned on all the platforms. That's what gives you the identity in the platform. So you look exactly like a normal user, right?
Okay. And does this work on the mobile as well?
That's right. It's independent of the client and the modality.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Super.
Any other questions? Then just one quickly from me. In the public space, interoperability between the different messaging platforms, as Dean was sort of talking about, is quite difficult because of all the sort of different formats and the tweaks and sort of do you see any of those issues?
Yeah. So you do. There's differences at a couple areas. So between Slack and Microsoft Teams, right now there's the best alignment on messaging formats, right? So Cisco has recently closed the gap, but we're waiting on the public APIs so that we could close it in what Mio does. But for example, threading, Cisco just came out with reactions and edit. So right now, when we don't have lineup on the messaging, we do our best to use some sort of text or UI element to still match it, right?
Okay.
And then but structurally, Microsoft Teams and WebEx Teams have the best alignment on the structure in terms of a team-based structure and the hierarchies and the limits on that they have on each team. So that makes some of the kind of administrative set and forget capabilities a little bit easier than with Slack. So, but in any case, we do believe that the core messaging function, certainly the core messaging functions over time are going to be converging into more and more commonality, right?
Yeah.
So whatever one competitor sees that provides value, like maybe MPIMs on Slack, others are going to be deploying something similar. So we'll always be doing our best to match it up. So
Great. And then just one final question. When we look out almost 2 decades ago, when the IAM platforms were sort of, okay, we have an API. No, we don't have an API. Okay, we have an API, but it's going to be really difficult to integrate to. At the moment, the enterprise messaging platforms seem to be public API, relatively open. Do you see that continuing, or do you see that there might be a repeat of what we saw with Yahoo IM, AIM and the rest?
yeah, I see that if you're purely a collaboration messaging platform like Slack, the value for integrations and connecting that communication to your business services are going to need to be there. So I don't see API programs disappearing for any of the major collaboration
Understood.
platforms. They're always going to have to provide it.
Because there's a paying customer rather than it's free and
Yep.
you're trying to monetize off the back end.
That's right. That's right.
Perfect. Excellent. Again, a round of